I made you a handout tonight because I know y'all love handouts. I didn't know if I was going to get it or not. Our printer acted up at work. And when I finally got it to work, it put it on 2 pages instead of front and back like I usually do. So that's why they're stapled. And I circled what we're looking at tonight takes place in Troas. So I circled it on your map if you want to see where we're at. See the little circle at the top? Yeah, it's right on at the border of Asia and Greece. I think we're going there. This is on their way back to Jerusalem. Just for a minute. It looked so lonely over here. I thought I'd get it out for a look. Yeah, I had to cheat y'all last week with a 5-minute one. Yeah, so we'll have to go like Paul did, 6 hours tonight. Yeah. So we're in Acts 20, and we're looking at verse 7 through 12. I'm trying to break it up in scenes because Acts is like a movie. And so you have different scenes where different things take place, and some have more action than others, but that's kind of what I'm trying to do. Well, I don't know that he normally went 6 hours, but he did that night. On the first day of the week, when we were gathered together to break bread, Paul talked with them, talking about the believers in Troas, intending to depart the next day, and he prolonged his speech. Boy, that's been said about a lot of preachers. They prolonged their speech until midnight. Have you ever been in church till midnight? In a service?
Like watch night service.
Well, not watch night, but I mean like a regular church service. Yeah. Back in the day. Yeah, where everybody can say, back in the day. It's been a while, but back in the day. Yeah. So this was not, we get the idea here that this was not something that was common for them. And so it's kind of like if, I don't know, if Arthur Burke came to town and he said, I can be there Wednesday night, but that's it. Then we would probably do something similar to what they did. So Paul's coming through town. I can only be there one night. And they said, okay, we got you. And so they're going to squeeze all the life out of Paul they can while he's there. And so part of their service, and this was every service, they would have their worship time, their time of instruction and so forth, but then they would end it with a meal. And so that was what was called the Lord's Supper then, was that. It wasn't this. Yeah, that was chicken dinners back then. It wasn't this stuff. Now, they did have the unleavened bread and the wine, which was the normal part of what we would call the Lord's Supper, because Jesus said, here's your example. But they also had a meal. And so they would eat together, fellowship, and then they would usually wrap it up with the elements. And so that's what was going on here, and that's why it goes so late. There were many lamps in the upper room where we were gathered, and a young man named Eutychus, sitting at the window, sank into a deep sleep as Paul talked still longer. I'm just glad to read passages that have nothing to do with us. I said I'm glad to read passages that have nothing to do with us. So I started to call this the danger of falling asleep in church. Because I told Danita this morning, I said, we can have a lot of fun with this one tonight. Yeah, and we don't even go to midnight. But I guess the other part is true. It just keeps taught still longer and longer. I guess I'm talking too long. 30 minutes too long. But when I say that, I think of E.V. Hill, which if you don't know who that was, he's with the Lord now. But he was a black pastor in L.A. And he went to his church where he spent most of his career in ministry. And he said we first started out there, it was a Baptist church. So what was it? Mount Zion? Mount Zion Baptist Church. And he said every Sunday morning he'd get up there preaching, and he was one of them screaming preachers, hell hot, heaven sweet, and he just let it go. And he had a lady on the front row every week when he got to preaching, she'd just go, whoo, and she would just have a spell down on the front row. And when she was having her spell, the ushers would come down and escort her out. And so after 3 or 4 weeks of that, of them escorting her out, he asked them, said, what are y'all doing? And they said, well, we don't want her to be a distraction. He said, oh, you want to get rid of distractions? She doesn't bother me. Now, Deacon so-and-so sitting over there that falls asleep every week, he bothers me. So take him out. So I always think about that when I think about folks falling asleep in church. All right, well, I'm not going to belabor that. This conviction comes from the Holy Spirit. So I'm going to let him do the convicting work, not me. All right, and being overcome by sleep. And people say the Bible is not true. He fell down from the 3rd story and was taken up dead. Now, 3rd story, that's pretty high up there, so pretty tall ceiling. But Paul went down and bent over him, and taking him in his arms said, do not be alarmed, for his life is in him. And when Paul had gone up and had broken bread and eaten, he conversed with them a little while until daybreak, and so departed. And they took the youth away alive and were not a little comforted. Now, get the picture. This guy falls out of the window. Could you imagine that? Paul's preaching, and this guy falls asleep and falls out of the window. That might disrupt the service, especially when somebody started yelling, he's dead. He's dead. And Paul goes over there, gets down on him. He's not dead. Get up. And he raises the guy from the dead. Raises the boy from the dead. You know what? What I really wanted to talk about tonight, I'm having fun with the going to sleep stuff, but is miracles. Because we were talking about this today in our meeting. I was trying to remember I can't remember if it was Walnow or who it was. It might have been Dutch. But they were talking about the fact that we're moving into a time when miracles are going to become common. And that's what I want to talk about tonight. Because what I want to do is in a sense draw a contrast between what we read here and what would happen today if this were to take place. Yeah.
What does it mean for you?
That's a weird expression. I was actually going to look that up. Let me see. They got a lot of comfort, I'm assuming.
Paul uses that sort of writing style of a couple of them.
Yeah. They were a lot comforted. But I'll tell you what, I'll look it up real quick.
Luke, I think there's 2 or 3 more times in the book that use that exact same literary style.
Yeah, we've run into it before. Let me see. I'm going to look at the New Living Translation. It'll be the easiest. What verse was that? 12, okay. Okay, in the New Living Translation, it reads, "Meanwhile, the young man was taken home alive and well, and everyone was greatly relieved." So, all right. So what I want to do tonight is talk about miracles, because there is a section of the church or the faith that believes in miracles today. And while I appreciate that, sometimes I think the packaging can get in the way of the miracle. And I'm going to explain that in just a minute. So let's just pick up with my little lesson outline. And again, I'm not going to harp on falling asleep in church. Every believer, early believers prioritized gathering regularly for communal worship, teaching, and fellowship. Paul is on his way in this passage to Jerusalem before Pentecost, but stops to speak to the Christians living in Troas.